This is a new style of video for me, and what I've done is I've taken videos that I've taken this last year where I am cooking with you and walking you through cooking from scratch for my large family of 9. If you're new here, my husband and I joke we never thought we were going to have a large family, but so far we have 7 children. We are not an allergy family, so if you're an allergy family, some of these recipes might not apply to you. But hopefully you can get a few ideas from it. And I've compiled these videos where I walk you through. Now, this video will get long. It's almost 2 hours. So if there is a recipe that you want and I forget to link it in the iCard, or I forget to link the video that you can find the recipe in the description, just leave me a comment and I will write it out in a reply, or I will send you to the specific video so you can get those recipes. And then this beginning of this video, I am just taking actually my holiday leftovers and I'm trying to repurpose them. So you saw me take some cranberry sauce that I had made. I turned it into cranberry bread using my grandma's A to Z leftover juice and adding a tablespoon per cup of juice and turning it into JELLO. And then I had a bunch of leftover mashed potatoes that I turned into potato rolls that will be baked and then put in the freezer in the way that we would pull them out for a meal. I hope you enjoy this long video. I know you could put it on in the background, listen to it while you're cooking or cleaning or in the kitchen yourself. I have some new ideas for the new year, and if you have any questions about cooking for a large family or recipes, you can leave them in the description. I hope you enjoy. After an expensive month of eating out, I quickly realized this month cannot go on the same path. So I made a deal with myself. Anytime I'm in the kitchen preserving in some way, I'm also trying to prep something for us to eat. As a large family of 9, there's a lot of mouths to feed. We eat a lot of food, and I really do like to cook from scratch because I know what goes into it. I know that it's whole foods, and I can add extra nutrients. If you've been around, you know how I always add something a little extra. And in today's recipe, I am making a big batch of granola. I did recently buy these chopped dates from Azure, and I really like it. It makes it granola making a little bit easier than my Costco dates. So these ones from Azure are definitely going to be a repeat purchase. And what I love about these basic base recipes is you can mix and match and add things in of whatever you have in your pantry. Now I'm adding the dates and oatmeal and coconut flakes and chia seeds and flax seeds, all these different healthy ingredients that my children and us get a well-rounded balance. And here I'm doing coconut oil. I'm trying to use up this sorghum syrup. Normally I use maple syrup, but I was trying to use up some of this. It kind of tastes like a maple syrup / molasses. The only real trick is to make sure you really mix up that oil and maple syrup because it wants to separate. And then I just mix it up in a big pot and I lay it on a cookie sheet. If you get your fingers wet, it doesn't stick to your hands, but I press this in very well so the edges kind of can get burnt if you're not really pressed in very well. And then I rotate it in my oven a couple times on a 350 degree. And the trick I love is with this granola is if you like a crumbly granola, when it comes out of the oven, just take a wooden spoon and just kind of stir it around. But if you like it chunky, then let it completely almost cool and then break up the chunks into whatever size you want. One of our favorite things is pizza, homemade pizza. It never gets old. And today I am just using some focaccia bread. What the children like to do is to do personal pans. So a lot of times, a lot of us eat the same ones, but they do enjoy having to choose their own. And normally I would actually put the tomato sauce in a bowl with some spices, but I ended up just putting all the spices on top. And today it was just chopped ham and pepperoncinis. Again, a great way to use up little bits that are in the fridge and made into a fresh new meal that everyone loves. because I already had the oven on with the granola, I went ahead and made some zucchini bars. And obviously you can tell I have little ones because there are pieces missing everywhere. But I'll cut this with my wooden cutter, and then I'll let this cool and then add it to the freezer. Another thing that I get back into doing is when I'm using the oven, I'm trying to batch another meal or recipe if I can have a minute to do so. And with the zucchini coming out of the garden, it's a great way that I know the zucchini will get ate. It's not a week that something goes wrong, and one of my fridges have been on the fritz, so I'm trying to move everything back over and seeing if a complete defrost has worked. And fun fact, no, it didn't. So we have a part ordered, so hopefully that will help. But it's a good time when you have to do this, that you clean out the fridge, you reorganize it. We did, if you haven't been here for a while, we did two fridges side by side, and then they just look like one big fridge. As a large family, it was one way that we could accommodate our smaller house with a large family. And then in the right fridge, I just have it set up as vegetable drawers and kind of the leftovers. And then the left fridge, I do our fruits and our drinks, and then our condiments are all organized. And then because we are high in preserving, this was some strawberry jam that we had went strawberry picking. I'm just checking all the seals and writing on my lids and taking full enjoyment of all those beautiful jars. And then the other project I am constantly doing, it seems like, is freeze drying my herbs and medicinal flowers. I do have a workbook I created for myself, but I have it also for sale to track my freeze dried, not only my jars, but how much my machine has ran and then how I stored it. My herb and tea collection is growing quite wonderfully, from chamomile and feverfew, and I freeze dried some strawberry tops and holy basil and lavender and other flowers from the garden and things to make salves here in the fall. What a blessing it is to have a bounty. Summer still is in full swing, but it has been extremely hot with heat advisories, so we have been trying to find things to do around the house and try to get some maybe inside projects done or fun things we can do inside. And one of those I realized as a homemaking and cooking from scratch is my children don't actually know some of the mainstream food. One of my younger children heard on a show talking about chocolate pudding, and they said, "What is chocolate pudding?" And I realize sometimes it's hard to describe things for the children to understand when they haven't had any kind of reference. So I did my best to explain, and then I said, you know what? That is something we could do here since it doesn't heat up the house that much, and it's a fun activity. And it would be fun to make it and try it. And since we live within the city limits, we don't have access to a cow, and we don't drink a ton of milk. So milk is usually made for bread making or some fun treats. So I decided to whip up some chocolate pudding. And since I don't normally make this, I had to look up a recipe. And one thing I do when I make a new recipe is I always follow the recipe exactly as written the first time. I tweak it later. And I knew this seemed like a lot of sugar, but I still followed the recipe. And the other thing with making home cooked meals is my children's palates are different and can really taste when something's very sugary and it's almost too sweet for them, which as a mom, I'm not really complaining. I can link the recipe that I used, but next time I would definitely cut down the sugar. And then I just used some of these glasses I had and I don't know if I should have let that cool a little bit longer before putting it into the molds, but since they were glass, I felt safe to do so. And you'll see here in a minute that I put them on a towel and let them cool for a little bit before placing them into the refrigerator. But also, it's nice to have individual size servings. That way everyone can just take one. The recipe didn't call for cinnamon or vanilla, but that was a last minute addition. And then I just poured them into individually sized portions so it would be easy to eat. And I saw also in the recipe that I was talking about and in comments that I had watched a couple videos on making chocolate pudding, and apparently there is controversy when making pudding whether you cover it with cling wrap or just let it cool down and naturally create a little bit of film on top of the pudding. Film, is that what you would say? I don't know. And then of course, I always have a buddy that wants to be in the kitchen, so I'm having him help with the dishes while I finish up my other tasks. So fun fact, I don't like onions. But I've realized some of my children like onions, so I'm trying to know how to have them around and then create them into recipes that not everyone has to eat the onions. I swore growing up, my mom was like, you couldn't even taste the onions. Well, when you don't like something, you can pick up on it almost immediately. It just like makes me shiver thinking about biting into an onion in spaghetti or something. But anyway, I quit Instagram about 6.5, maybe even 7 years ago. I don't know. It's been a long time. But when stories first started, I would use that as kind of my TV time at night. And a lot of those people that I followed were recipe channels or creators that cooked, and I would follow them. One of them I follow, and I still get on her blog occasionally, is No Crumbs Left. And I decided to try her marinated onions for some of my children that like onions but don't necessarily like the bite of it. And I figured, oh, if they don't eat them on, they can eat them on sandwiches or we can put them on pizza. They did like the marinated onions. You leave them on the counter for a couple days to get that flavor, and they soften a little bit and take out the biteness of an onion. And then when they didn't eat them all in a couple days, I moved it to the fridge and I actually used it over marinated for chicken and roasted vegetables, which was delicious also. Hi, bud.
Hi, Mommy.
I didn't use a whole onion just because I didn't know if the children would like this. So I half the recipe, but it's simple. It's onion, some olive oil, red wine vinegar, a pinch of salt, and I didn't have oregano, but I do grow marjoram in my garden that I had freeze dried, so I use that instead. And then I just put a light fitting lid on it, or you can leave it uncovered. I believe that she just leaves it uncovered in a bowl on the counter, but I lightly covered it with one of my lids and leave it there for a day or two before you start eating it. Herbs, I'll move to this before winter. And I just bought one because I wanted to try it out, but I wanted to focus on having a fall garden in there. I have some green beans planted, some herbs. I am trying sweet potatoes, even though I know you won't get very much, but I thought it would be fun. If I did potatoes, I thought maybe I could do some sweet potatoes. Another new recipe to me is out of my Pomona Pectin recipe book, and that is apple sage jelly. I have harvested and preserved plenty of sage for making my sausage blend and things like that, and it's not a herb that we use in a lot of different ways, but when I was flipping through my cookbook here, I saw an apple sage jelly, and apparently it's really good on pork and on glazes and maybe some vegetables, and I thought I would try it today. So I'm actually having the recipe, and I'm not canning it, I'm just actually putting it in the freezer to try it out before I make a big batch to can. And And I got my apple juice just from the grocery store, and I always follow the canning recipe exactly. I really do enjoy using Pomona's pectin because I can get away with less sugar. The tricky thing I find with Pomona's pectin is sometimes you can make a batch, and when it sets up and you open a jar later on, months later, that the jam has set and it's kind of hard, like too hard to rub onto a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if that happens, I just end up using those jams for if it's on a warmed biscuit that the jelly might melt a little bit, or when I make oatmeal jam bars, or over a pancake or something. It's kind of just like you make a jam recipe and maybe it turns into more juicy than actually not setting up. But sometimes with Pomona's pectin, I find it's the opposite. It's almost too thick. And then also with trying new recipes, and especially with canning, it's so much labor intensive to can anything that every year I only can 1 or 2 new things. To me, I'm not an advanced canner, and I have yet to actually pressure can anything. I've been scared to pressure can. I bought my pressure canner last year and I was like, I'm gonna use it. And then I was like, oh, I'll use it this winter when I have more time. And I never got it out. It's kind of scared me. And a friend said, if you can use an Instant Pot, you can use a canner. My goal this winter is to do that. But it's good to try new recipes, but it can be slow going sometimes when you're learning also a new skill. And then we are moving on to one of actually my favorite meals to make. It's a 1-pot meal, but it's so flexible and versatile. I have a lot of these meals, I suppose, in the kitchen, as far as it's like a base recipe and then you just add whatever you have. You can flip-flop it. So I had some leftovers in the fridge, and I do a 1-pot orzo dinner. And this was a roast left over, and I'm actually sneaking in some eggplant, and I'm crushing it up because I know not everyone loves the texture of eggplant. And this was freeze-dried actually from last year. And then the sauce base, I usually have like a half a cup to a cup of sauce. And today I'm using red pepper sauce that I had made and froze months ago from peppers that were on sale at the grocery store. I roasted them and made them into a sauce. And then for our family, I do about 3 cups of orzo. And then when I get that all mixed up, I will add broth. And this juice was left over from roast, but there's so much concentrated flavor, I can just add water on top of that, and it's still not going to dilute any flavor from the recipe. And then I usually pair this with a vegetable, and today it's zucchini from the garden, and then usually some fresh bed on the side, and it's always a big hit. And then I don't add any dairy as far as like cream or milk, but sometimes I add Parmesan cheese on top, which is what I did today. Thanks for being here today. Next week I have a homeschool planner review and flip through if that interests you, and then I will have some preservation videos coming out next month. I picked up 100 pounds of blueberries last night from, my sister has a connection to a blueberry farm in Michigan, and last year I only got 50 pounds and realized we ran through those way too fast last year. I didn't even get through all of winter. So I got 100 pounds this time, and of course we'll eat a lot fresh, but I'm starting to process them because the one thing I don't want to do is waste money by not actually processing, especially when you get a big quantity like that. The good thing about blueberries is that they're easy to just wash and freeze, which I will do probably a couple of, at least 2 10 pounds, because we'll use them in blueberries, or blueberry cobbler is a favorite around here. But I have 10 pounds drying to be frozen. I have 10 pounds that I just put in my big Dutch oven to make freezer jam. I like freezer jam because really honestly, you can truly not add sugar or add as much as or as little as you want. I probably will still can some that we can put on pancakes when we're already adding syrup, so I can control how much sugar my children get. But we have a lot of blueberries, and I'm so excited because it's also one of the cheaper at $2 a pound this year. I got these $2 a pound and for 100 pounds. So fruit cost, I realized this last year after I was really tracking our food, is meat is first, of course, and fruit is the second biggest expense that we have in our house. We really like fruit. My children would usually rather eat fruit than vegetables. I cook a lot of vegetables in our food, but as far as like fresh eating, they don't really love it. But we have a lot of blueberries to process today, and I'm gonna show you a few ways how I do that. Of course, we would have to have blueberries as our first meal, and we recently upgraded to this Blackstone because of such a good brand, electrical skillet. And it's so easy when we're a large family of 9 that we have to make grilled cheese or paninis or pancakes. It makes it so convenient. And it does come with a lid, so I can close the lid if I need like grilled cheese to melt. I really, really enjoy it. But we always use it for pancakes now instead of having multiple pans on the stove going. It's just that much more convenient. And I love getting these blueberries. I probably, as long as my sister has the connection, to continue getting these blueberries, because that couple drives all the way to Michigan and back that same day, and these blueberries are so fresh. And I don't know if you can tell, but these are very large blueberries. And it was so nice to know that they were fresh, that I didn't feel that I had to rush and get all 100 pounds down in a day or two. But I did get a lot done because of the fact of washing and laying to dry and then packaging up for different things. Most of the time we have these containers. These containers are normally holding for when I make a blueberry cobbler or a blueberry galette or something. These containers are so convenient to stack up in the freezer. But I have a batch of jam going on the stove, and you'll see me do multiple batches on the stove just because I like to have different flavor profiles. One batch was like a blueberry lemon, one was a blueberry cinnamon, and I also did a blueberry mint from the garden that was really good. And then some batches I smoothed into more of a blueberry sauce, and there's others I kept more of a jam type consistency. But I just kind of pulverized with my stick blender to make it smooth, and then these were labeled as blueberry sauce. And how we'll use this is in some desserts, or mostly for pancakes, or on top of puff pancake, or something like that. And this year I decided to just do some freezer bags, because what I did, I'm laying and freezing them flat, and then I bought, it's actually back to school, I grabbed another one. I just have the like milk crate, the plastic milk crate totes. I bought one to keep in my freezer just for these sauces and fruit compotes and stuff. In years past I have done plastic containers, which I still have in love for soup and different things. But since I'm processing so much fruit this year, it was a little bit of a space saver. And also, if you knock over a container out of the freezer, most of the time it's going to break just because it's plastic and it's hard. So it's a little bit more convenient that way also. And then I'm doing only one batch of blueberries with the freeze dryer. So we loved our freeze-dried fruit, but with blueberries, I've tried to freeze-dry them straight from the freezer because they say, oh, the juice doesn't puncture. I've tried to poke them with forks and freeze-dry, and it ends up being not completely freeze-dried, or it comes out with this, it kind of blows up into like taffy instead of actually getting dried. So the only way I found freeze-drying that actually solidly gets it dried properly in the freeze dryer is cutting them in half. And I end up passing this on to one of my other children for knife skills, is what I said. But we did one batch for the freeze dryer that is still in the freezer I need to process. It is not my favorite to freeze dry just because of the time commitment to get them prepped. And then we are moving on because we can't have fresh blueberries without having a blueberry galette. So this is basically a rustic pie. The pie crust is always the same, and then the filling can change. I like to use arrowroot powder. I feel like it is thicker than using flour, cornstarch in my kitchen much anymore, just because it's hard to find a non-GMO cornstarch. So I just use arrowroot powder. And with something like blueberries, you need a little bit more. So I probably used a good 4 to 6 tablespoons of arrowroot powder. And I like to do cinnamon. This is some lemon peel and some vanilla and a little bit of sugar depending on the blueberries. This batch actually wasn't super sweet and overripe, but they weren't sour either. So it was a nice balance. So I didn't have to use that much sugar. And then once you get that all mixed up, you put it onto your pie crust here and make sure you scrape out all that goodies from the bottom. A lot of times it has a lot of the cinnamon and flavor and stuff, so make sure you get that. And then I kind of shape it and you're kind of folding in the sections a little bit. You want to make sure you don't have any, holes in your pie crust, because it will leak out, which happens and no one complains. It's still a pie. And then I fold it up nicely, and then I will end up egg washing it and then sprinkling a little bit of sugar. But you can do this, like I said, with any kind of fruit. Peaches are really great. It needs quite a bit of arrowroot powder too. Pears need quite a bit of arrowroot powder, cornstarch. We make a lot of apples in the fall, and that doesn't use as much, depending on the type of apple you use. But this is a favorite, and pie crust can be batched and also frozen. Keep the crust cold as possible, then it can sit in the oven longer to really get that flavor and the juices flowing from whatever fruit that you have in there. So a cold pie crust is a must. And I bake this for 15 to 20 minutes. And the other thing about something really juicy like the blueberries is you really do have to let it come down in temperature. It doesn't have to be completely cooled, but it needs a good little bit before you actually cut into it, or you're gonna have like a big mess on your plate, which is never a bad thing if you're serving it with vanilla ice cream. And then of course I forgot to actually get a shot of the blueberry galette when it was done, but it was oh so good. And the blueberries did take most of my few days up of preservation, but I still had some other preservations, and one of them was beet tops. I chopped these up and I'm starting to put some of my herbs and teas and things like that into the freezer, whether I cook with them or I decide to throw them on a freeze-dried tray. But I also wanted to have the fall, when I start doing soups, I can add into soups. And I'm also trying to get ready for my garden to be the fall. I had to pull out a lot of squash and things like that in my garden, so I have a lot of empty space that I need to fill back in. And then I have some green beans. This batch I decided to freeze because I do like to add frozen green beans to pot pie or shepherd's pie. And we've been basically eating most of the green beans fresh. I haven't even really been able to process much of them, but since I have a lot of holes in the garden right now, another big round of green beans to have. One of my favorite ways to actually cook green beans when they're fresh like this, pot of broth and some butter. It takes on that flavor and it just makes the green beans way more flavorful. And coming up soon, I have more preservations. I am working on a back to school freezer prep from scratch cooking. And now that it's fall, it's back to once a month grocery shopping. So if any of that interests you, I hope you subscribe, and I will see you soon. It's back to school season, and even though I am a mom of 7, 5 of my children are school age from high school down to kindergarten, and then I have 2 toddlers. 5 of those are boys, so it's a lot of meals around here and food. But just because I homeschool doesn't mean I'm in the kitchen all day long every day cooking up. So like most moms, we need stuff that's prepped, prepared, or planned to get meals on the table. So today, my meal prep, mostly 90% from scratch, is going to be based off of my August fall menu plan that I planned out. I give this away free for my email subscribers. But what I'm doing to start the school off right is I am basically taking my fall menu and I'm doubling it and freezing what I can or prepping it, and that way it can just be reheated. And then also if nights are busy or we get home late or we have a weekend project, I can still pull from the freezer and be able to eat. Because I don't know about you, if you've ate out recently, it is so expensive. The only thing I prepped today is I did make a small batch of broth yesterday, and then I have a roast in the fridge that I am gonna braise in the oven while I get some other stuff done for enchilada filling, and enchiladas probably tonight, because when you're in the kitchen, it's so important to just double what you have, especially during a big day. Just plan on eating a little bit of whatever you're making. That way it just makes it a little bit easier on you also. And the third thing I prepped is I did 4 cups of pinto beans in water overnight with some apple cider vinegar. That helps come off that phytic acid that can give you bloating or gas. And I'm gonna rinse these off really good. I'm gonna get them in my Instant Pot to cook because I'm gonna need them for tonight, but also for some bean burritos for the kids. It's been a long time since I did that. I need my Instant Pot for something else. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the beans right now by rinsing them and putting them in here with some fresh, cool water. Instant Pot makes beans so much easier. And also, if you just wanna have beans and get away from canned to save you some money, beans are great just in Instant Pot and then can be frozen and used later.
I'm just rinsing my beans off, and then I will place them in my Instant Pot with a bay leaf. I don't normally put seasonings right in there with the beans because honestly I'm usually using the beans for multiple different things, and I just season when I actually cook with them in the final product. So fresh water, bay leaves, and I set my Instant Pot for 25 minutes on the bean setting and let them do their thing.
While the beans are cooking, I'm going to get my roast out. I love braising meat, and normally I would have at least 2 roasts. So the braising meat is not a weeknight meal unless you're at home all day, but it definitely is worth the trouble on a weekend getting 2 roasts or a big huge pork roast or something braising in the oven. The meat is so tender, something completely different than you get from the Instant Pot or the crock pot. There's just so much flavor built into a braise. It's so good if you've never tried it. But I'm gonna have a couple of things going in the oven, but I'm not worried about flavor swapping because my meat is gonna have a lid on it. But I am gonna cook up this butternut squash because it is starting to look a little sad, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna do with this. Some of my kids want me to try a butternut squash soup, but I don't know that it's soup season yet because it's gonna be 92 degrees today. So I might end up turning that into something else, but I do need to get it cooked up, whether it goes in the freezer or I do something else. Let's get cooking on the meat. With braised meat, you want to make sure that you season well, which I'm almost out of this, with a bunch of salt. And I'm gonna sear it in my pan before adding whatever liquid I'm gonna use because it just adds to that flavor profile. And you can absolutely just let the meat do the flavoring, or if you're going for a specific flavor profile like Mexican or Cuban or something like that, then your spices will reflect that. But just a braised meat with basic salt, pepper, garlic, onion, and letting it do its thing in some broth is amazing and super versatile, depending on what you're gonna add to it later. And normally I have some of some kind of braised meat in my freezer already prepped because it is so good. And I have some tallow in here. I'm almost out of that, so I need to render some down soon. So I'm gonna take this big, huge hunk, put it in here, and I'm gonna sear on all sides. My liquid of choice is just some broth that I made yesterday, but if I'm making like pork carnitas, I'll add orange juice and broth, or orange juice and lime juice for that flavor, those flavors to really come out. This is just basic because I'm going to hopefully be able to make dinner tonight and some enchilada mixture for the freezer. So I'm just doing salt, pepper, garlic, onion, and then I'm going to put this in the trash, wash my hands, and then flavor the other side. You can also cut this big chunk down if you want the oven to not run as much, but a big chunk like this, 300 degrees for about 4 to 6 hours depending. It can take less if it's chunked up, and then if you have like a big pot with more meat, it's gonna take longer. So worth it, I can't tell you.
If I would have made the decision to actually cut this up, I would have originally cut it up in chunks and then seared all sides. I decided afterwards, I just knew it would cook a little bit faster if I did go ahead and cut it up, so I did. And then I just let the residual heat on the pan saute that side. And then since I knew I was making this for dinner and then leftovers would be for enchiladas, I decided it would be smart just to go ahead and season it now with the flavors already cooking into it. So I threw some cumin and chili powder and paprika and garlic powder, and then I topped it off with broth. So my rule of thumb is I just add about to the top of the meat, I add the broth. A lot of it soaks in, some of it evaporates, but it concentrates that flavor of the broth. So a good broth makes a huge difference.
If your children are anything like mine, they like treats and snacks too. So, and if you've seen my recent once a month, now that it's fallen back to once a month grocery shopping, if it hasn't came out on my channel, it's coming out. I'm just waiting on my Azure order. But I bought these at the Amish store. It's a large container and I don't want it to go stale. So what I'm gonna do is make a fun treat for the kids that I can keep in the freezer and it can last way longer than going stale in this container. So I'm gonna start off with just laying down some pretzels. I'm gonna have to melt some chocolate with a little bit of coconut oil, and I'm just gonna do that on the stove. And then I buy Costco peanut butter because it's a little runnier and it makes it easier when I make granola or I'm baking some bars or something like that. It's runnier and it's easier to handle. So I'm gonna use a little bit of peanut butter for some protein. And then some of these I actually plan to also put on some coconut flakes. Not all of my children like coconut flakes, but enough of them do. So I'm gonna put a bunch of that, and then I might chop up some nuts and put some nuts on top because more protein is always a good thing. I'm just gonna put some hot water in a bowl, to warm this up just a little bit because I know I'm towards the end, like halfway. And then the coconut oil, I'm just gonna put like a tablespoon of coconut oil in there. And I'm gonna use the rest of this chocolate. I have more in the freezer, but we're gonna see how far that gets me. And then I have coconut flakes. These are the small shreds, but it'll work just as well. And I'll get that going real quick. Oh, some of those got a lot more chocolate than others. I made a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. I feel like after these are frozen and I pull off all the pretzels, we're gonna have a field day with lunch with the remainder on the parchment paper, which is gonna be just fine. I decided to skip the nuts. I did coconut in half and then half just peanut butter and chocolate. And then I will portion these out once they are frozen.
I actually love snacks that I can prep and freeze because that means I always have something in the freezer, whether it's to round off a meal or to have a snack, or if friends stop by or we want a last minute dessert, there's always something that I can pull from the freezer. So this is definitely going into my notebook to keep in rotation for something for the freezer. And then I might have a dishwasher, but not everything can go in the dishwasher. So I'm constantly washing to keep things cleaned up. So if I need to stop at any moment, I'm ready to stop. And then I'm always referring to my list to make sure I am on task doing what I need to do.
Okay, this next one is one that I have been making for my children for a decade probably, and that is baked oatmeal. And usually I do a 9x13 or a pie dish, but I'm gonna make them into mini cups. That way they could be more of a grab and go, or if I have a choose your own breakfast, they can pick a couple things that they want of themselves. And this is great because depending on the time of year, you can add whatever seasonal flavor you want. Today I am going to do blueberries. Since we don't live on a homestead and don't have chickens, eggs are precious because I have to buy them. So in a recipe like this, I actually use flax, ground flax. It acts as the binder, which is what the egg is, and it adds some nutrition, and then the eggs are left for like fresh eating. Always like to sneak in, if you're around here, you know that I like to sneak in nutrition. This I am doing molasses. Normally people just buy brown sugar, but I like to have my molasses on hand because I know the source versus whatever's in brown sugar. So I'll just add some molasses. It adds a depth of flavor also. And with the flax, you do 1 tablespoon of flax, 3 tablespoons of water.
And this baked oatmeal recipe is so universal that you can swap ingredients so easily. You can not have any fruit and just do some spices or coconut or chocolate chips. And then depending on the time of the season, we can do apples and cinnamon, or we can add some pumpkin and pumpkin pie spice, or blueberry with lemon zest, or orange cranberry is a favorite in the winter also. It's so very versatile for being a base recipe.
All right, my beans are done, and I just mixed up 2 batches of my refried bean seasoning mixture. It uses cumin, chili powder, paprika, salt, a little pepper. I'm using my home olive oil and homegrown garlic, and then lots of butter. And a trick with butter, if you want some softened and don't want to use your microwave, just use room temperature water and put a stick of butter in there. In like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, it will be softened enough and use it and still have nutrients versus the microwave. And I'm not sure how many cups of this 4 cups of dried is gonna give me. My recipe calls for 4 cups of cooked beans, and I am gonna put together some bean burritos with some cheese for the kiddos for the freezer. It's something that we used to eat quite often and we don't. I usually pair it with some sour cream and some homemade guac or chips and salsa. It's a really quick lunch I can pop in the oven while we're still doing school. And this is a recipe, again, that I've used for like a decade, and it's always a hit. Cups, but it doesn't feel like there's a ton left in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and strain it out, strain most of the water out and see how many beans, because if there's not that much, I'm just gonna go ahead and mix them up in here anyway. 2 batches, so I'm gonna go ahead and a little raw garlic never hurt anybody. So I'm gonna do a big tablespoon of that.
I will leave all of the seasoning recipes in the description below. Sometimes I would normally actually have that on the stove and I would saute the garlic a little bit before adding the beans. Today I didn't. It didn't make much of a difference. And then you can also use black beans instead of pinto beans if that's what you have on hand. I do that plenty. And then I also find that it makes a real difference when you add plenty of butter or some kind of healthy fat, whether that's lard, because it gives you that creamy texture like you would get in a Mexican restaurant. Before I had my immersion blender, I would usually just use my blender for this. And then blending it versus just mashing it with like a potato masher, which I've done plenty of time, lends itself to that Mexican restaurant texture. And I always have someone to help with taste testing or helping in the kitchen. There were only about 2 cups of beans left in my Instant Pot, so I did go ahead and add those.
Okay, while the refried beans are cooling down, I just rinsed out my Instant Pot again so I can go ahead and use it. This is a lentil soup and we really like it. I like to serve it on the side of crackers or naan bread, or I do like soup sandwich, soup grilled cheese, something like that. It has a lot of protein with the beans and the quinoa, so it's a meal in itself and it's pretty gentle on the stomach too. If people are sick, it's a soup that you can have, because honestly, not all of my children like chicken noodle soup. So it uses broth as the base and it has only a couple spices. Some of my children like to add extra lemon when we're serving it. And then I am adding, this recipe I made up after the brand Amy's Golden Lentil Soup. That is so good, but it's so expensive, especially as a large family. So I don't buy it anymore. So this is the closest thing I've gotten to actually a lentil soup that we like. But the ingredients don't show everything on the label either, so it says like spices. The carrots add a sweetness, and I just ordered some saffron. I'm not really familiar with, but I know it's some Indian type meal. So I'm gonna put like 2 or 3 little, like maybe 2 little ribbons. I don't know what they're called. But this is also a recipe that you just throw it in and it cooks in your Instant Pot in literally 5 minutes. So it's really easy, but it's also easy to like prep and then freeze, because it freezes and defrosts so amazingly well. So I'm gonna make a batch of this. If some of the children want it for lunch, they can have it. If not, I'll cool it down and get it into freezer container.
I will add the lentils, the quinoa, and the split peas, and then I go off to rinse everything off before I bring it back to the Instant Pot to add my carrots and my seasonings. And you could chop the carrots up. I shredded them today. They cook down really well. I never buy frozen carrots because I don't like the texture. If your children don't like the texture of the carrots, you could absolutely use your immersion blender after it's done. And then, like I said, it's only a couple of seasonings. It is cumin, curry powder, some salt, and then I add broth and some lemon juice. Now, you could add water, but you're not going to get a lot of flavor if you do that. I have done that, or if I'm low on broth, I'll do a mixture of broth and water, but you might have to add a little bit of seasoning or more lemon juice for an extra flavor. Or if someone is sick, you can just not add as many spices just so it's more gentle on the tummy. And then it throws in the Instant Pot on high pressure for 5 minutes. And then it comes out pretty smooth. All of the pieces are just kind of melt in your mouth, but like I said, you could throw it with your immersion blender if you wanted to.
Okay, it's lunchtime and I've been in here for probably an hour and a half and I'm kind of losing steam. So the lentil soup is going right now. The beans have cooled down enough that I can make the bean burritos. I have a small batch of cheese, and honestly, I'll serve that to the children right now. And then once the cheese is run out, it's fine. I can freezer burritos without cheese, but I'll serve them with sour cream and guacamole. So they're not gonna miss the cheese. It's not necessary. But they decided they wanted this since it's been a while since we had both of these things. So those that want both they can pick and choose. So that's my point. I'm losing steam. So I'm going to serve lunch, take a little break, and come back during nap time. The only thing that is left is the meat is still in the oven, which is fine because I'm using that mostly for dinner.
The children decided they wanted lentil soup and bean burritos for lunch, so that's what we did. I used all of the cheese for the children's lunches, so these are just the beans. And then for the freezer, what I do is, since I reheat the burritos in my oven, it's easier to lay them as flat as possible. That way it reheats a little easier and faster from frozen. And then I kind of use the beans almost as kind of like a glue, so it holds its shape a little better. And then I will roll these out and I stick them on a cookie sheet. I'll flash freeze these on my cookie sheet and then put them in a gallon bag labeled bean burritos. I sometimes do this with like chicken and rice and things, but it's been a long time since I got back into this routine. Then I didn't have enough tortillas, so I have just a small batch that actually goes in the freezer, and I can serve this up when we have like a taco night or enchiladas or haystacks. And then always the dishes going. I'm moving back over to my butternut squash, which is cooled down for me to handle, and then I decided I wanted to go ahead and use my immersion blender since I already had it out. I'm going to blend this up, and then I'm going to use this in a little bit. And I would love to know if you have any experience with cooking a bunch of butternut squash like this and blending it and then freezing it and then pulling it out for any kind of soup or like pasta sauce or anything like that. I have not done that, but it's something that I was thinking about doing because one of my children had asked about having butternut squash soup. Last year from Aldi, I got a butternut squash pasta sauce that my children really liked, so I thought about maybe making it myself. As I'm pulling out these baked muffin cups, I was realizing maybe it would be smart to just have a batch of parchment liners on hand just for freezer cooking days, because it would have been a little bit faster to pull all these out, less mess to have to clean up, and then just that much more convenient. So I might go ahead and do that. I have silicone liners, but I was reading an article recently, and I'm not sure. I was reading an article recently on silicone molds and leaching into the food, so I have to do some more research, but I might go ahead and move to parchment liners if I'm doing big batch freezer cooking or just buttering the pan really well to go ahead and use. Because even though I let these cool, some of them just still stuck to the side or started to crumble and kind of fall apart, but that's okay. Because the children wanted lentil soup with lunch, I only fill up 2 of the containers. I would have normally had probably 3, possibly 4, but that's okay. 1 container I know will serve us for lunch if I serve it with some vegetables or fruit and then maybe a sandwich on the side. So I got 2 meals out of this.
I found some bacon in the fridge. I was gonna do BLTs, but what I'm gonna do instead is actually make another breakfast. And while I'm gonna just pop it in the oven with the braised meat because it's almost time to come out. So I'm going to finish the bacon off and I can pull both of those out. And then while that's baking, I mixed up the butternut squash with my immersion blender, and I am going to go ahead and make my grandma's A to C bread. I do have a recipe here on the blog from a few years ago, but basically it is a recipe you can swap out ingredients. So if you have zucchini flowing in, do zucchini bread. If you have pumpkin, do pumpkin. If you do carrot cake, you do shredded carrots. I have swapped out a few of the ingredients to make it a little bit more healthy. Instead of like canola oil, I use coconut oil, flax eggs for eggs, but that'll use up my butternut squash. And then I'm gonna make this yummy breakfast, and then I'm gonna see how much more steam I have to see how much more I can get done. And then I think we're just gonna do like haystacks with the braised meat instead of doing full-on enchiladas because Mama's tired.
And this was another recipe the children were really excited about because I haven't done a lot of baking since it's been summer. So this was a well-received recipe also. The video to this and recipe will be linked in the description. And right now I am just measuring how many cups of puree I have to know if I can single batch or if I can double batch, which I had just enough to do a double batch. So I'm gonna mix up a whole big old bowl of batter, and then I'm actually gonna end up splitting into two to do a different flavor. And normally I would do the sugar and coconut oil right away, but since I measured out, it's gonna be fine. The puree was still a little warm, so when I add the coconut oil, it kind of melts it just enough that I need it to be. The butter or coconut oil does not need to be melted, it just is supposed to be softened. So it was fine to mix up just the way it was. And I'm doing the flax egg again because, again, it's baking. So I want to save my regular eggs for fresh eating. And then my husband just bought me this ergonomical spatula, and I can't tell you how good it feels to have like tools that actually help you. I know that seems silly, but this ergonomical spatula has been my favorite because it just rests, and when you twirl it around the bowl, your wrist doesn't hurt. I know it's weird, but it really does make a difference. And then I'm back to grinding some wheat to add to my baking and my bread again. So I am grinding just enough that I do maybe like a 40-60 blend of flour, chopping those nuts while my wheat grinds, and I can finish adding it to my batter. And then, like I mentioned, I'm splitting my batter into two separate bowls so I can do two different flavors. The first one, I'm gonna add some cocoa powder. I honestly don't measure this. It was probably a third of a cup that I did and mixed it in. The other batter is going to be the typical pumpkin bread, so I added pumpkin pie spice. And then with the baked oatmeal cup fiasco, I decided I was just going to do 9x13 pans. So I buttered those and figured I could just cut slices later and package them up that way. Since I already had to really scrub those muffin tins out already once, I wasn't going to do that again. And I normally go for the muffin pans just because it's quicker to bake with. But the 9x13s, you can expect for it to bake for 45 to 55 minutes depending. And I like that my Pyrex ones can have a lid on it, and I pop those in the fridge. So we enjoyed a little bit of everything that I made today over the next couple of days, which is what you want when you're freezer cooking too. Just plan on eating some of it so you don't get frustrated when you wanted it all to go in the freezer and then you ate it fresh. Just know and expect that some of that is gonna get ate. And I'm just smoothing this on, adding some of those pecans for the pumpkin pie bread, and then I will pop these in the oven while I keep moving on.
Okay. The next recipe is, if you've ever went to Panera Bread and tried one of their egg souffles, it's one of my favorite things. I actually, this past winter, I found a homemade version of it and put it together. So the crust is a puffed pastry, and make this at home. There's so many less ingredients. It's flour, salt, a tad bit of sugar, and a bunch of flour, and then just some water. You roll it out, you fold it in thirds, you roll it out, you fold it in thirds a few times, and then you can pop it in the fridge. It lasts, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. You can make it into desserts or use it as a crust for a quiche or something, or we've even used it for like homemade Pop-Tarts and things. So it's really easy, and it actually freezes well since it doesn't have yeast in it. You can actually prep a bunch of this and saran wrap it up really good and throw it in the freezer. And it's also why I wanted to cook up that bacon. And then you need to make a little bit of a roux and use only a couple eggs. And I'm gonna end up making this in a muffin tin because I don't have enough ramekins to make them bigger, but that's okay. And I'm gonna show you how I do this as soon as I can get all this butter cut into my flour. I'll show you how to fold it, roll it up, and then while I make the roux and get everything else prepped, I'm gonna keep this in the fridge because you want that butter to stay cold so it forms nice flaky layers.
In the beginning of my homemaking cooking from scratch journey, biscuits and pie crusts and things like that were never on my list because I always found them
difficult and I didn't understand that sometimes the recipe calls for ingredients, but you have to adjust those depending on the temperature in your home, or maybe the flour is not the same flour as you bought last time and it acts a little different. So it can be tricky, but it's so worth learning to make certain things like biscuits and pie crust because they are universal. I've also learned over the years, if I can have and order it at a restaurant, I can learn to almost always make it at home. And I know the ingredients that were used. I know something like biscuits and puff pastry and stuff, it's more about the technique necessarily than specifically measurements or anything. I think that's one way I have kept it fun in the kitchen, is because I'm constantly learning new recipes. There are plenty of recipes that my husband asked for or my children ask for. If it's their birthday, I can almost guarantee I know what they're going to ask for because it's one of their favorite things. But also trying new recipes. I get a lot of cookbooks from the library, but also I'm inspired by like this Panera recipe because we don't go to Panera that often anymore, but it's a favorite that we used to eat when I had a few less children, and it was like a special Saturday morning. So I've just adapted it so I can learn how to cook it at home, and then it doesn't have to necessarily be a special treat. And if I'm freezing or meal prepping to make things easier so I'm not in the kitchen 24/7, I do make 3 meals a day plus snacks and desserts. That's probably over 100 meals every single month. And it can get cumbersome and frustrating and, get in the ruts of things. But having recipes from the library, checking out books, being inspired by people on social media, or recipes that you're just looking up because you want, maybe, you have a bunch of potatoes, you want to find a new recipe. All that keeps us inspired in the kitchen. And I suppose that was some of the inspiration by starting my YouTube channel, is about cooking from scratch. Even though we're a large family, you don't have to just eat plain, boring meals. And we've always heard the connection of a smell or a flavor or a recipe can bring us back because they connect us to memories. And since I homeschool and my children are all in there, it's just one more connection I have to cultivate in my family. So maybe, when I'm a grandma, my kids and my grandkids come back to me and say, whatever I'm going to be called, Nana, Nano, Grandma, can you make me your special biscuits? Those are something I'm cultivating now because I want that in my lifetime, and it's something you have to practice. So if anything, I hope this gives you a little bit of inspiration. Okay, I hope you saw that. I made the roux, I let it sit for a minute, and then I added the scrambled eggs, and it looks chunky, but it's supposed to because the eggs are not cooked. And you saw me pop the puff pastry back in my fridge until the eggs and stuff were done, and I brought it out. You want a hot oven. When it comes to puff pastry or pie crust or biscuits, you want cold dough and a hot oven to create those air pockets. You can assemble and then stick it back in the fridge until your oven is nice and hot. I have mine up at 425. The only time you don't want to use that is if you have a glass pan. Cold glass into a hot oven, breakable, expensive, replacement, terrible. So I'm gonna go through and fill all these. Gouda would have been better Baking Gouda is just so good. I do have some green onions that I freeze dried from my garden that I'm gonna put in there, and then a little cheese on top. And then I like to fold over the puff pastry if there's enough room, because the cheese helps give a layer, because I feel like when you do egg bites, it creates like a crust, and then you almost, it's so chewy and hard. It must be some of the proteins in the egg. So I'm gonna assemble this, put a little cheese on, fold it over, and then I'm putting it into my hot oven for approximately 25 minutes or so. Okay, I'm about to wrap it up. I just put some rice in for dinner because we're gonna have some taco haystack type bowls. And I just wanted to show you, this meat is so super tender and it's got a lot of flavor on it. And I can just push it down with a spoon into the juices, and I'll cover it a little bit, and then we'll eat whatever we want for dinner, and I will put the rest into a container for the freezer. But I just wanted to show you how tender this meat was.
I forgot to show you the bites after they came out of the oven. One thing I forgot to do was an egg wash on top. It would have given it a golden brown look, but I'm just packaging everything up. I want to say, if you've made it this far, thank you so much. This is probably the longest video I've had on my channel, and I really actually do these meal preps often, and I didn't know if anyone would be interested in a full-on talk with me, cook with me video. So if you liked this and want to see more, just leave me a comment. I'm back to once a month grocery shopping now that it is fall, and I will also have some preservations from the garden coming up. So I hope you stick around, and if you're not subscribed, I would love if you joined me.
It's nap time, and I decided today I'm gonna use my afternoon nap time to do some more freezer prepping. It seems to work so well. So my goal is to do 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, and 2 snacks. And this is my second installment of my back to school freezer meal session. So I will link my original one from a few weeks ago. And then the only thing I prepped today is I baked bread. I know you've probably seen a ton of people make bread, so I didn't show that, but I made 2 loaves of bread, and then I got a bunch of butter that I thought that I would need in just some room temperature water to soften. And then I just started feeding my yeast with some oil, sugar, warm water, and my yeast, because I'm gonna make a stuffed bun sandwich. And my bun recipe only takes about 30 minutes to rise. So while I mix this up and let this rise, I'm gonna prep all the filling. But this might be a 2-day process just because I don't know how long I'm gonna have.
I found this recipe earlier this year, and we have used it from everything from making dinner roll sides to hamburger buns to hot dog buns and all kinds. It does have egg in it, so it's more of like a brioche, a sweetness to it. So it's 2 tablespoons of yeast, 2 cups of warm water, half a cup of oil, 1/3 cup of sugar, 2 eggs, 2 teaspoons of salt, and 6 cups of flour. And that recipe will make 16 buns, or about 32 dinner rolls. And it's a pretty quick rise with about 20-30 minutes rise. And then I roll them out and I let them rise a little bit longer before baking in a 400-degree oven for 10 to 15 minutes.
Bun recipe. I like to add cornmeal to the bottom of my pan so they don't stick. I also do that with pizza. So my thought is I'm gonna do some stuffed ham and cheese stuffed rolls, And it's different than our normal sandwiches, but a lot of times we eat sandwiches or grilled cheese and soup for lunches or a snacky lunch, and I thought this would be a nice change up. And I'm just gonna do plain ham and cheese. Some of my children like pepperoncinis in it, some of them like olives with it. We can decide what we're gonna do with that. And these are gonna have a second rise, so I'm gonna make them smaller than what I think, because I know they will rise again. Where did my other one? Oh, I washed it. Okay, so I'm just splitting these up so the rolls are about the same size. I'm not gonna go through and weigh them, but, and then I am just using a ham. We buy our meat in bulk, but the ham is not, even though I get the ham smoked, it's not our favorites to eat outside of like soup. So unfortunately, I do normally buy like a big ham piece at Costco or something, and then I just cut it and dice it for sandwiches or for breakfast. But this is ham because I made a ham and potato soup this weekend, and there was a lot of ham left over, and I decided that I wanted to make something for our lunches to go back into the freezer. I'm just taking this and stuffing a lot of ham and cheese in here and really pinching the insides. Okay. And that's also why I'm doing the parchment paper, so it'll catch any of that melty cheese so I don't have a huge mess on my hands. But really fold it over to a nice ball. Some oozes out. None of my kids are gonna complain. And then these will get baked before we put them in the freezer. Okay, I couldn't do that again if I tried. Literally the last one, emptied my ham and my cheese and filled my pan. So that's 1 in a million. So what I'm gonna do is let these rise for just a couple of minutes, and I was just thinking about it. I'm going to do an egg wash.
I went ahead and did an egg wash on this, and then I went back through with some everything bagel seasoning just because it was kind of just plain with the ham and cheese on the inside, so I thought I'd give it a little bit more flavor. And I have already had requests to make other versions of this, like a pizza version or a breakfast version, so I will be definitely repeating this. And it works best after you bake them and then after they're frozen. If you pull them out like the night before and then put them in the oven to reheat versus going straight from frozen to the oven.
Okay, I want to move on, but I have a ton of dishes to do. So while those bake, I'm gonna try and get all this done because I still have a little bit of time. The little guy is still napping and it's not time to start dinner, so we're gonna keep going if I can. This next recipe is oatmeal jam bars. I'm gonna double this, but actually I can't use all my 9x13s because I need it also for another breakfast I'm doing. So I'm doing one 9x13 and one 9x9 pan. The 9x9 might take a few minutes longer to cook, but it'll be a thicker bar. This I consider a snack unless I'm doing a protein-filled breakfast because the oatmeal and the sugar and the jam is a lot of sugar first thing in the morning. And then as far as the jam, I sometimes just do a fruit mixed with chia overnight and use that because the chia seeds add some nutrition. Today I'm gonna do one of them actually apple butter because I'm feeling like fall. The weather has changed a little bit and it feels like a fall day. So I'm gonna do an apple, and the other one I'm not actually sure yet. So I'm gonna double the base recipe, and then the jam is the only thing that's gonna be different. And you reserve half of the mixture you will press into the pan, and then the other half you just use as a crumble topping. And then My recipe, the changes I make to my recipe is I'm using half butter, half coconut oil. I always like to do coconut oil in baking when I can, but this is not a recipe I can fully do coconut oil instead of butter because it turns it too greasy, I feel like, and it's just a greasy mess. So I'm doing half butter, half coconut oil just because butter is a little bit more expensive and I like to eat my butter, if that makes sense. Like I wanna taste the butter when I cook with butter.
For one 9x13 pan, it is 2 cups of flour, 2 cups of oats, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of baking soda, 1 cup of butter melted, 2/3 cup of brown sugar, a splash of vanilla, and then 1 to 2 cups of jam or apple butter. And you just reserve some of the crumble for the top, but you end up baking this at 375 for about 20 minutes or so until it's just lightly brown on top. And then I completely let it cool before I go ahead and cut it into bars and put it in the freezer. I really enjoy having recipes like this in my recipe box where I can just change a portion of the recipe to whatever I have on hand, or if I'm doing something like this, I can have 2 different completely flavors in the freezer and not everything is the same. So my children are still not sick of all those blueberries from our 100 pounds of blueberries that we have processed. So I did a blueberry lemon flavor, and then I did the typical fall apple butter with some cinnamon. But I like to do this, and it makes it feel nice and fresh when we have different flavors to choose from, or my children will vote on which one they want me to pull out. But I bake these in the oven for about 375 for about 20 minutes, and then I'll pull them out, let them completely cool before I cut into them, which we ended up having some for dessert, but then I packaged the rest up for the freezer.
Super easy dinner, so I'm gonna have a few minutes to do these breakfast casseroles, and it is a French toast bake, and I love my Pyrex with the lid because this sits in the fridge overnight to help soak in all that egg and milk mixture, and then I bake it. I take the lid off, I put this glass pan in a cold oven, then I turn the heat on in the morning and bake it. And it makes it really simple because I actually put the butter and brown sugar on the bottom, so it's like an upside down cinnamon roll French toast. It's one of my children's favorite, but I'm going to bake 2 of them and then cool them down in the morning and then cut them into squares. Again, this is a breakfast. Since it has the egg mixture, sometimes we just have this and I'm not worried about it, but sometimes I pair this with some Greek yogurt or some protein because I find with my children, they just do better if they have a protein-filled breakfast. Talked about that butter mixture on the bottom, but before we do that, I have just some breadcrumbs from the freezer, and a trick is to actually fill up your mixture of breadcrumbs so you know exactly how much you need. And of course, this is not YouTube worthy. And my bag is ripped. Okay, those crumbs, not gonna matter. Okay, so I basically just fill these up to make sure I have enough room to put the lid on. And if I need a little bit more, I just made some bread today, so it's totally fine to pull off those heels and cut them up. These breadcrumbs from the freezer are really good for some homemade croutons. I just drizzle it with some olive oil and some Italian seasoning and bake them. My kids will snack on them like a cracker. That's another thing I do with breadcrumbs from the freezer. So this is actually just about perfect. And I don't wanna do halvesies with egg mixture, so I'm gonna do 1 batch at a time, and I'm gonna show you how to do it. I love a good make ahead breakfast like the night before, especially in fall and winter, because it just means that we can go a little slower in the morning, or I can go a little slower in the morning. And most of the time it uses a warm oven, so it kind of warms up our house first thing in the morning. So I mentioned I'm gonna do these in 2 separate batches just so I don't have to like worry about getting the egg and milk mixture completely even, because it's a little hard once you get that all mixed up. Let me wash my hands. So for a 9 by 13 pan, I do 6 eggs, 2 cups of milk, and then in here I will also splash my vanilla, nice splash, a pinch of salt, and then I add some of my seasonings in here, and then I add some to the bottom of the pan here in a second. And I just mix this really, really well. Make sure all the eggs are broken and mixed up. The spices don't always completely mix up, but that's totally fine. And then I'm gonna take my 9 by 13 pan of breadcrumbs and pop it in here. And these were frozen, so it's kind of stuck to the pan, which is fine. Okay, and then I will just let this sit here while I prep the pan for a minute to help that soak in. And I'm running out of space, Okay, you can see this. Okay, so I do a whole, this is 8 tablespoons of softened butter. I don't worry, you can melt it if you want. I'm always talking about homemade brown sugar. I only do about half a cup. That's 8 tablespoons.
This is also a really good recipe to have on hand for the holidays when you have visitors, or something you can make the night before Christmas morning or Thanksgiving or something that you're kind of working ahead so you can enjoy the morning. We did this growing up. My mom would make a casserole kind of like this for Christmas morning, so it would bake while we opened gifts and things like that, and then she didn't have to be standing in the kitchen the whole time. So it kind of brings me back to my childhood, and I love that my children enjoy this also. Another thing you could have added to this is doing some chunked cubes of cream cheese for like a cheesecakey creamy. You can also add nuts and different seeds and things like that. So there are ways that you can also adapt this to different flavors, but my children really prefer just the basic recipe on this one. But you can definitely mix and match a few different flavors with it. And then here are those stuffed rolls come out of the oven, and again I let them cool before I package them up into the fridge overnight and into the freezer. And of course, because I'm freezer cooking today, we kind of just taste tested a little bit of everything on top of that easy dinner that I made also. And then the next morning was the French toast bake that I cooked up. I cooked up both. We ended up having one for breakfast, and I was able to shove one into the freezer after it was cool too.
I got more of my list done yesterday than I thought I was gonna, so I'm rolling in to finish it today. And one of them's super easy. I'm actually gonna make some sandwiches. I was gonna make some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and some ham and cheese sandwiches for the freezer. Those, I know that I can make them during the day, but those are gonna be nice when we have field trips or hikes planned. Twice a month we do something like that. So I wanna get some sandwiches, so if we are busy, it's one less thing I have to worry about. Even though it's just peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, having them prepped sometimes for the week is nice in the fridge, because I have 7 children, so making 7 sandwiches still takes quite a bit of time. So sometimes I will take one of my bigger kids and send them in if we're not done with homeschool so they can start it, or we sit at the table and kind of do an assembly line. And then I have some bagels planned, and I'm gonna whip up this. I just have had this recipe for a long time. It has a normal rise, or you can slow rise it overnight. It's not sourdough, it's nothing special. But what I am gonna make is a flavored cream cheese to go with that.
This cream cheese is inspired by the Panera cream cheese we used to get. Now, there are things you can do. You can buy like Tuesdays, I believe, is half off bagels and things like that. But the point is that you can make things and have your own copycat version at home. It just takes a little bit of tweaking. So I like this cream cheese because it has the added benefit of probiotics. And then I add a bunch of cinnamon. I do a mixture of maple syrup and honey, and then I just mix it up really good. I added some nuts. Not all of my children are really big fans of nuts, so I didn't go crazy with the nuts. And then I'm mixing it really well, and then I end up tasting it and having to add a little bit more of all of the ingredients again because I just wasn't sure the amounts. But this will be a nice bonus to something typical like having some bagels. My bagel recipe isn't any fancy, but it does make 16, and to do that, it is 4 teaspoons of yeast, 8 teaspoons of sugar, 2.5 cups of warm water, 3 teaspoons of salt, and about 7 cups of flour, and I mix about 16. And I let these rise a little bit too much the second round before I started boiling them, so they came out a little flat, but they do poof up quite a bit. And I know there's tons of recipes for sourdough and different things like that, but I just did my tried and true recipe right now and then paired it with something fun like cream cheese, because remember, I'm trying to streamline and get stuff in the freezer. Another time-saving hack is just doing plain bagels. I know you can do a whole bunch of different flavors, but my thought process is doing plain bagels because I don't know what's going to happen when I pull them out of the freezer. I might want to make breakfast sandwiches, or I could just do a flavored cream cheese, or we could just be having it on the side and they just want butter. So if I have a plain bagel, I can use it in a variety of different ways. If it was, say, a raisin bagel, we might not want to put that on an egg and ham cheese sandwich bagel, and we'd be forced to use it in a different way. So when I make base things like that, a lot of times I just do it plain because I don't know how I'm going to use it when I pull it out of the freezer.
My high schooler is trying to kick me out so they can do their home ec dinner project, so I am running out of time. But my last thing is actually just one bowl, mixing up some cookie batter and flash freezing the dough balls. I don't prefer like frozen cookies that are defrosted to eat, but I do like to have cookie dough on hand for a sweet treat or something fun if we have visitors over that I can pop in the oven, and there's nothing like the smell of something baking in the oven. So I will change out the flavors. But today we are making an oatmeal chocolate chip cookie, and I have been making this for a decade. So it's a family favorite, and they do spread out. So you can make the dough balls a little smaller than one maybe that doesn't spread out, but these ones spread out quite a bit. So make sure you have room and adjust your dough ball size to your preference. I'm just gonna flash freeze them and then put them in a bag, and I have a gallon bag that I reuse that just says cookies, because depending on the time of year, sometimes I have ginger snap cookies in there, chocolate chip, whatever. So that's another thing that to keep on hand that's easy to prep it in advance just in the freezer. I have to use a pan because all of my bowls are being used. So here we go anyway, making things work. Okay, 1 cup of butter. I do 3/4 a cup of sugar, and we're gonna cream those together before adding our eggs. And I wanna make this brown sugar because it gives it a little bit of a better flavor. So a little bit of that, and then clean this up. trying to get out of their way to make dinner, instead of getting my mixer out, I figured this might be a little easier, but I'm not so sure if that was the right choice here. Okay, and I'm gonna use the egg from yesterday when I egg washed my ham and cheese buns. But you need 2 eggs, that was 1 egg.
I should have said, if you bake them right away from the recipe, they will spread out quite a bit. But since I cook them from frozen, they don't tend to spread out as much because they go straight from my freezer to my oven. And then today I did something different. Instead of doing the cinnamon it called for, I actually did pumpkin pie spice, and everyone really enjoyed that flavor today. Along with this recipe, I will have my bagel and my French toast and my bun and oatmeal jam bar. All the recipes down below for you. And if you liked this and want to be on my email list, I will leave a link to my email list also. And if you didn't see my first round of freezer prepping this school year, I will also leave that here for you to watch next. If you liked this video, I would love for you to share in the comments so I can keep doing them.
We just got over being sick for over a week, and of course Mom was the last one to go down, but I'm kind of over drinking broth and eating soup. So my goal today is to food prep a little bit. It's just some easy things that we can have and still easy kind of just to put together so Mom can still rest. The first thing I'm gonna do is do a bunch of applesauce per the kids' request. I need to go back and get seconds so I can do more applesauce, but I figured we'll do one big batch. I'm gonna use my 8-quart, and I just bought this earlier this spring. And I have to say, I don't think crock pots are made like they used to be. I had my other one probably for 15, 16 years. And this one, I mean, it works, it's a crock pot, but I feel like it's not the same temperature wise as far as how it cooks things. But alas, what am I gonna do? My other one was done for. So I'm gonna start this, and then before school, I'm gonna go do school with the children, and then I'm just gonna food prep for maybe an hour to get some things for the next couple days so I can still rest and we can have food.
Being sick as a large family is probably one of the hardest things to deal with, just because sickness sometimes can last way longer because it has to travel through everyone. And sometimes I'm lucky and actually don't end up sick, but that means I just got behind. And since the weather's been weird, I'm still having stuff come from the garden. I'm wanting to enjoy the fall produce that's coming locally, so I felt good enough on this day that I ended up doing a whole lot more than I intended, but it did get me some breathing room for over the next few days to trickle in, so it was well worth it, but I was feeling it by the end of the day. And we're going to start off with apples. We've been enjoying them, eating them fresh, but the children had asked for applesauce, so I usually do seconds, like I mentioned, for applesauce, and then these ones I usually just keep for fresh eating or for pies, but I thought it would be nice just to have a crock pot going of applesauce that made the house smell nice and everyone can enjoy for a snack and something that we could eat over the next couple days. And then the other thing, I grabbed a few squashes from the store, and this little baby acorn is the only one that I grew before the squash bugs found all of my plants and decimated them, but I did get one baby acorn. But I had some requests to get some more acorn squash because there is a dish that my family likes that I'm making that is easy to prep ahead and then reheat. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I personally like spaghetti squash. There's only about 3 of us maybe on a good day that like spaghetti squash, but I actually cook this up and then I eat it with chicken and usually spinach or arugula or something on top with some hot sauce. And I had actually picked up the buffalo chicken from Costco as an easy meal before I got sick. So I just threw that on top of this for a couple lunches after I roasted it, and it was really good. So I'm getting all that cut and prepped, so I'm going to pop a few things into the oven at the same time to cook down. And then with the acorn squash, all I do is a nice big pat of butter in there, and then I will add a touch of salt, a sprinkle of sugar, maple syrup, molasses, and then some of my family likes pecans, so I try to make them a little bit bigger so they can get picked out if they don't want to. And then I basically just bake this in the oven until it's kind of a golden brown. And the acorn squash is side, but still uses that in-season produce. And I mentioned produce coming from the garden. So I bought these mini red bell peppers, and I knew they said mini, but I didn't realize how many. And the problem with these is that that seed pocket inside is just so large that it just made peeling and cutting these so labor intensive. And since you can't just like bite into it like an apple to eat or dip in a veggie dip, it kind of was a pain. So I will not be buying those again. Even though we do enjoy red pepper sauce, I will just buy more regular size red peppers next year. And this one plant did a ton of mini peppers, and honestly it was more than we could eat fresh eating, so I labor intensely chopped them up to put them in the freezer for when we have fajita and taco nights over the winter. I did grow an eggplant this year, but my children don't like baba ganoush, so what I'm doing with this one is I'm actually just slicing it, and then I'm going to freeze dry it, because once it freeze dries I can like powder it up and I just add it to soups. My daughter, for her high school home ec project, made an eggplant parmesan, which everyone seemed to decently like, but we had a few extra eggplants, so I'm just freeze drying these and we'll add them to the soups this fall, because I was told if I put it in the freezer it just turns kind of rubbery. If I can, I always like to have fresh produce that is washed, so when my children go to the fridge and get something out, the same with veggies prepped, they take it out of the fridge and can immediately eat it, and I don't have to worry about, oh, that wasn't washed or anything from the store. So it's a good idea to have fresh produce already washed and ready to go into the fridge. And then the next thing I did is I had prepped some lemon balm just in some cool water overnight, and then I filtered out the leaves, and I'm using the last of my honey that I get from Azure. It's the orange blossom. It's my favorite honey from there, and it took me all summer to go through this big jug, but now that it's winter and I do more baking, I'll go through with that a little bit faster. But I made just a lemon balm lemonade for lunch over the next couple days to have as a treat. But lemon balm is really good for your stomach also. And then jalapeno peppers. I only had one plant this year, and it has brought us a lot of jalapenos. So next year I'll probably plant 2 just so we can enjoy them so much more, because our favorite way to eat them is just stuffed jalapenos wrapped in bacon. So when I gather enough, I just go ahead and process them all at once, and I've just been stuffing them with the cream cheese and putting them in the freezer. And then when I get them out, I buy the bacon from Costco because it's thinner than I get from our pork that I buy in bulk from our meat butcher. So the Costco bacon's a little bit thinner, so it's easier to wrap. And then because one thing leads to another, I had to pull out drawers and jars because food was starting to wilt and go bad, because I had been down and sick and priorities with the children being sick. So it kind of turned into a catch-up day, and this is where I should have just stayed the course. But I did a lot of fridge clean out and wiping things down, which was fine, but I was tired by the end of the day. But I did get a few meal prep options and sides to go with something, and then meat I'm just able to throw in the crock pot and the instant pot, and then pair it with a few of these main staples coming into fall and winter. So I'm finding more and more recently, the more that I food prep ingredients, and especially since it's fall with the squashes and the potatoes and things, there's so many different ways to create a meal out of the same thing, but using it in different ways. It's easy to just kind of food prep those more like a restaurant than having options to turn it into whatever I want. And it was kind of the same way. When I have leftovers, I don't
I don't always serve the leftovers as I cook them the first time. Sometimes I roll them over, but a lot of times I take those leftovers and turn it into something else. So I'm going into this fall and winter more of really trying to focus on in-season produce and different ways to eat that and enjoy it. And not only is it going to help our grocery budget and eating healthier foods because it's fresher, but also just giving me a little bit more time back in my homeschool mama schedule. For us, starting to use tallow and lard was kind of like a mental hurdle. The last 2 years, we have successfully transitioned to using lard and tallow in our everyday cooking, and then avocado oil and olive oil are kind of set aside for certain dishes or uses, and it's cut down on the cost of that, but also it's something we get from our butcher when we buy meat.
So I'm gonna start some kitchen projects, but nothing really too involved. I need to prep some stuff for our meals this week, but the first thing I'm gonna do is I finally have enough tomatoes to do a batch of tomato sauce, and I had these in the freezer to collect enough from my garden, and now I'm just gonna pour everything onto, I'm gonna take out all this water, but I'm gonna pour all these on in my turkey roasting pan, and then I'm gonna roast it in the oven while we do school, maybe an hour, hour and a half, and then I'll be able to blend it up and then finish it on the stove with some more spices if it needs it. I did collect some green onions and some herbs from the garden, some green peppers, and a bunch of tomatoes. All different sizes. I know I didn't plant enough of the normal tomatoes you would use for sauce, like the Romas, but it is what I had, and we didn't eat them near as much fresh, so this will work.
If you put whole tomatoes into the freezer, when you take them out and let them sit and defrost just a little bit, the skins really peel off pretty easily. So I went ahead and did that before I threw this all into the oven. I had thrown some garlic cloves and some herbs to help that roasting process to really infuse those flavors. It was probably in the oven about an hour and a half, and then I pulled it out and let it cool down a little bit before I pulled out my immersion blender and blended everything up and tasted it, added some salt and pepper. I always have a helper in the kitchen, so she is helping me do lunch while I do this little mini project here real quick. Blended it with my immersion blender, and I don't have a food mill. I think that's what it's called. You could do applesauce or tomato sauce, but I do have a bowl and a metal mesh sieve, so that is why I did to strain out the chunks and also all of the seeds, and it came out actually really smooth. I'm surprised at how smooth it came out. And although this isn't a huge batch of tomato sauce, I actually have a bucket full of green tomatoes on my counter right now because even though it's October, my garden tomatoes and certain things were not ready to give up in the garden. The weather's just been so weird this year. So I have green tomatoes, and as they ripen, I've just been throwing them into the freezer. And so I will have another batch here soon. And then I pulled off the last couple peppercini peppers and made a brine for the refrigerator. These were so good. They're almost gone already. So next year I know to plant some more banana peppers. And then switching days, this was the next day. I am doing a few different kitchen projects just to get prep for the couple days ahead. I like to prep usually twice a week, just a few days to have some meals or snacks or different things, components of meals ready to kind of help me out and help pull stuff together a little bit faster. And I've noticed we've been eating a lot of chips and crackers from the store. And today I decided to do a batch of popcorn. I don't know why I get into a routine that we eat it and then we don't, and then I forget about it. So I like to do coconut oil, and then I'll put 2 or 3 kernels in while the coconut oil melts, and those first couple will pop, and then I'll add more popcorn and some salt. And then I just keep shaking this a little bit so it doesn't burn. And then we have 2 different ways that we like to have popcorn. I'll put the popcorn in there, drizzle it with some avocado oil if I'm prepping it for the next couple days. If we're eating this fresh, I'll do butter, but the oil will stay a little shelf stable a little bit more. But today I'm just doing some white cheddar powder that I get from Azure Standard, and then the oil helps the
that powder stay on the popcorn, and then I'll usually add a little bit more salt. And like I said, I was prepping this ahead, so this went into a glass mason jar, and then we'll eat it over the next couple days. And I'm tasting it for the salt. And then next up is another little project that can be done and made ahead for the week, and that is some croutons. So I'm drizzling it with my favorite olive oil from Oliveda, and then I just do salt, pepper, a little bit of basil, and then I just mix it up a little bit. I had the oven on a lot today, so I was trying to do some projects that would use the oven up, and so I'm using that heat wisely. And then this just mixed up, and then I put it in. It takes a little bit more time in the oven because my bread crumbles were from the freezer, so it probably took a good 15 or 20 minutes, and I shook it around a couple times in the oven, and then I let it cool completely on the counter, and then I just add it to a mason jar. This week I planned on having some chicken Caesar salad. The croutons can go on top of that, but also my kids actually like the croutons just as like a cracker, so it's a good reminder too that I could make that instead of buying chips from the store, to try to get away from that a little bit more. And then biscuits. I feel like if my family could say one of my top 3 things that they love that I make, one of them is biscuits, and I feel like I can never have enough. These biscuits are awesome to prep ahead and have in the freezer, so I don't have to stand here and make them every single time we want biscuits. I use them in a few different ways also. I'm making them a little bit ahead right now, so I just lay them on a cookie sheet and then I flash freeze them and then throw them in a bag. Also end up topping that in a shepherd's pie type of a dinner later on that you'll see in a minute. And then we are back to those croutons. I said I just keep my croutons in a mason jar, and then I use this wooden lid. It is not airtight, so I feel like if there's any moisture or anything left in there after it's been cooled down, it can escape from using this mason jar lid versus one of my leak-proof lids. So I like using these wooden ones. They're not going to go stale because these croutons will be gone within the few days. And then here is that dinner I had said. It's basically a shepherd's pie, or I guess a cottage pie topped with biscuits, and everyone enjoys it.